A desperate donkey tried to wake his mother, but love alone couldn't reach her in the silence of death. As he nudged her gently, hope flickered like a dying ember. Just when despair threatened to consume him, a stray dog appeared, drawn by the heartache that lingered in the air. Together, these two lost souls would uncover a bond forged in grief, revealing a powerful truth. Loss speaks a universal language. Prepare to witness a journey of heartache and healing that defies all odds. Every morning, as the golden sun spilled over the dusty farm, the young donkey would bray softly, his call answered immediately by his mother's deeper tone. Their ritual was as reliable as the sunrise itself, a sacred conversation that marked the beginning of each day. The farm hands, weathered men and women who had seen generations of animals come and go, often paused in their morning chores to witness this exchange, finding something profoundly moving in its simplicity and constancy. Farm workers often remarked how the pair moved as one entity. Where the mother went, her son followed, their shadows merging into a single silhouette against the earth. Even when separated by the day's work, the mother sometimes used to pull the vegetable cart to the nearby village. They would call to each other across the fields, a reassurance that distance was merely physical, never emotional. Their connection went beyond the typical mother-child bond. It was as if an invisible thread connected their hearts, allowing them to sense each other's emotions without a single sound. When storms raged and thunder cracked open the sky, the young donkey would press against his mother's side, finding sanctuary in her unwavering presence. She would shield him with her body, a living fortress against the world's harshness. The farm owner's daughter once photographed them during such a storm, two figures huddled together as rain lashed around them, and hung the image in the farmhouse kitchen, captioning it simply, "Love." The pair had their rituals. Every evening, they would walk the perimeter of their pasture together, the mother seemingly teaching her son the boundaries of their world. They had favorite spots: a sun-dappled corner where wildflowers grew in abundance, a sturdy oak tree that provided shade during the hottest hours, and a small pond where they would drink side by side, their reflections rippling in the clear water. But lately, something had changed. The mother donkey's once steady gait had slowed, her movements becoming labored, as if each step required careful consideration. Her eyes, once bright and alert, now carried a distant gaze that seemed to look beyond the fields they called home. Her appetite had diminished too. The sweet apples that once disappeared in seconds now remained half-eaten in the grass. The farm workers noticed, but said nothing. Animals grow old, after all. But the young donkey sensed the shift with every fiber of his being, staying closer than ever, as if his proximity alone could hold back the invisible tide that was slowly claiming her. He began to take on protective behaviors, unusual for a young donkey. He would stand between his mother and any approaching vehicle, his ears alert and body tense. At night, he would position himself so that she had the softer ground, the better shelter. He would bring her the tenderest grass he could find, nudging it toward her with gentle persistence, until she took a few obligatory bites to please him. His devotion only intensified as her strength waned, as if love could be a medicine administered in doses of proximity and attention. The farm veterinarian came twice, his ancient truck kicking up dust as it rumbled down the dirt road. After each visit, the farm owner would stand at the fence, watching the pair with a heaviness that matched the mother donkey's slowing steps. No medicine appeared, no treatments began. Just that watchful waiting that animals understand better than humans ever could. One evening, as twilight painted the farm in shades of purple and gold, The mother donkey nuzzled her son with unusual tenderness. She lingered longer than normal, her breath warm against his neck, before leading him to their favorite grazing spot, where wildflowers grew in abundance. There, beneath a canopy of stars beginning to emerge, they stood side by side, two silhouettes against the fading light, a moment of perfect peace before the coming storm. The mothers seemed to be memorizing everything: the scent of her son, the feel of the earth beneath her hooves, the whisper of the evening breeze through the nearby trees. She guided him to each of their special places, as if conducting a final tour of the world they had shared. At the pond, she drank deeply, then watched as her son did the same, their reflections merging in the still water. Under the oak tree, she rubbed her side against the rough bark one last time, a familiar gesture that had worn the trunk smooth over years. As night fully descended, bringing with it a blanket of stars and the chorus of crickets, the mother donkey settled onto the soft grass, her movements deliberate and slow. Her son stood vigilant beside her, occasionally lowering his head to touch his muzzle to hers, a question in the gesture that received only a tired blink in response. But their peaceful existence was about to be shattered in a way the young donkey could never have prepared for, despite all the subtle warnings nature had been whispering. For while love can anticipate many things, it cannot fully prepare any heart, human or animal, for the moment when forever changes in the space of a single breath. Dawn broke differently that day. The sky lightened from black to gray to a pale, washed-out blue. But something fundamental was missing from the world. The chorus of morning birds seemed muted, as if they too sensed the shift in the farm's delicate balance. The dew clung heavily to the grass, transforming the pasture into a sea of diamond droplets that would normally have delighted the young donkey. But today, he noticed none of it. The young donkey stood motionless beside his mother's still form, his eyes fixed on her face, waiting for the familiar flicker of her eyelids, the gentle rise and fall of her chest that had been his first certainty in life. His breath created small clouds in the cool morning air, but hers did not. The warmth that had always radiated from her body was fading, replaced by a coolness that confused and frightened him. But the morning brought only silence where her breathing should have been. He nudged her neck gently at first, then with increasing urgency. His soft brays grew louder, more insistent, echoing across the silent farm. He circled her body, pushing at her shoulder, her flank, trying to rouse her from this unnatural stillness, each attempt more desperate than the last, each failure more devastating. He tried nipping at her ear, a playful gesture that had always earned him a reprimanding but affectionate nudge in return. Now, there was nothing. In his confusion, he tried all the things that had always brought her to life in the mornings. He trotted a short distance away, then back, inviting her to follow as they had done countless times. He gathered a mouthful of her favorite clover and dropped it near her muzzle. He even gave his special greeting bray. 3 short calls followed by one long one that had always been their private signal. The silence that followed each attempt was like a physical blow. The farm workers found him this way as they arrived for the day's labor, their conversations dying on their lips as they took in the scene before them. They stood at a respectful distance, hats removed, watching the young donkey's grief unfold with a raw honesty that only animals possess. The farm owner's daughter wept silently, turning her face into her father's weathered jacket. The old man's eyes were suspiciously bright, though his face remained impassive. "Let him be," the old farmer said quietly to his workers, who shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to proceed with the day's tasks. "He needs to understand in his own way. Death isn't something you can explain to an animal, or to a child for that matter. It's something you have to witness to comprehend. One of the younger workers, new to farm life, stepped forward hesitantly. Shouldn't we move her before the heat of the day? The farmer shook his head. Not yet. That would only confuse him more. Animals need closure just like we do. We'll wait until he's ready. Throughout that endless day, the young donkey refused to leave his mother's side. He stood guard as the sun arced across the sky, chasing away any birds that dared to land nearby with aggressive stomps and warning brays. The farm cats, normally bold enough to weave between the hooves of the farm animals, kept their distance, sensing the intensity of emotion that radiated from the grieving donkey. Didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't acknowledge the gentle attempts of the humans to lead him away, or their offerings of fresh hay and water. His world had contracted to this single patch of earth where everything that mattered to him lay motionless. Occasionally, he would lie down beside her, pressing his body against hers as if his warmth could somehow revive her. Then he would rise again, circling, nudging, calling, a cycle of hope and despair that was painful to witness. The farm owner's daughter returned several times throughout the day, sitting on the fence at a respectful distance, her sketchbook open on her lap. Her pencil moved across the page, capturing the donkey's grief in delicate lines that somehow conveyed the weight of his sorrow. "I want to remember," she explained to her father when he questioned her. "This is the purest form of love I've ever seen." As the afternoon waned, the young donkey's energy began to flag. His movements became slower, his calls less frequent. Exhaustion competed with grief, pulling at his limbs, making his head droop. Still, he remained vigilant, his body positioned between his mother and the rest of the world, as if protecting her even now. As evening approached, bringing with it the farm's familiar sounds, the distant lowing of cattle returning to their barn, the clatter of equipment being stored away, the calls of workers to one another as they completed final tasks, a new presence entered the pasture. A thin, ragged dog with patchy fur and watchful eyes crept cautiously toward the scene of grief. It moved with the careful deliberation of an animal accustomed to being chased away, its body low to the ground, ready to flee at the first sign of hostility. This was a stray that had been lurking at the farm's edges for weeks, surviving on scraps and avoiding human contact. The farm workers had spotted it occasionally, a flash of movement at the forest's edge or a shadow slipping between outbuildings at dusk. Some had left food out, but the dog was too wary to be coaxed closer. It existed in the periphery of farm life, neither wild nor tame, belonging nowhere. The dog stopped several yards away, sitting on its haunches, head tilted as if puzzled by the donkey's behavior. For hours, it simply watched, its gaze moving between the grieving son and his departed mother. There was an intelligence in those eyes, not the simple curiosity of an animal, but something deeper, more knowing. Perhaps it was recognition. Perhaps this solitary creature understood loss in ways the well-cared-for farm animals never had to contemplate. As darkness fell completely, it inched closer, drawn by something beyond hunger or curiosity. Perhaps a recognition of the sorrow that hung in the air like autumn mist. The moon rose, nearly full, casting the pasture in silver light that transformed the everyday into something ethereal. In this otherworldly illumination, the dog's approach seemed almost ceremonial, each step deliberate and meaningful. The young donkey, exhausted by grief, had finally collapsed beside his mother, his head resting against her neck in a posture of absolute defeat. His sides heaved with each breath, his usually bright eyes dulled by sorrow and fatigue. He barely registered the dog's approach until it was just feet away. Then his ears flicked forward, his body tensing in automatic defense of his mother. A warning rumble started in his chest, not quite a bray, but a clear communication of boundaries. His hooves shifted, finding purchase in the soft earth, ready to rise and drive away this intruder if necessary. The farm had its share of predators, and though this dog seemed too small to be a threat, instinct ran deep. But the dog made no threatening move. Instead, it lowered itself to the ground, belly pressed to the earth in a universal posture of submission. Its ears lay flat against its skull, its tail tucked tightly against its body. Every aspect of its posture designed to communicate that it posed no danger. Its eyes, amber in the moonlight, held no malice. Only a strange, knowing sadness that mirrored the donkey's own. For long moments, they regarded each other across the small space that separated their worlds. The farm animal and the stray, the mourner and the witness. The night insects began their symphony around them, crickets and cicadas creating a background rhythm to this silent communication. A gentle breeze stirred the grass, carrying with it the scents of the farm, hay and earth, and the distant smell of the farmhouse kitchen where the humans were finishing their evening meal. Then, with infinite slowness, the dog crept forward until it lay just beyond the reach of the donkey's hooves. Its thin body curled into a question mark of cautious companionship. It made no attempt to approach the mother's body, respecting the invisible boundary of the donkey's grief. It simply offered its presence, a gesture so subtle yet so profound that even in his sorrow, the donkey seemed to understand. The night deepened around them, stars pricking the velvet darkness one by one. The farm fell silent except for the occasional distant bark of the shepherd's dog from the farmhouse yard. The moon continued its arc across the sky, its light painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. And in that silence, something indefinable passed between the grieving donkey and the solitary stray, a wordless acknowledgement that while death may be faced alone, perhaps grief need not be. In the darkness, two creatures from different worlds found a common language in loss, the universal experience that connects all living things in the end. Neither moved much throughout that long night. The dog occasionally shifted position, stretching stiff limbs before settling back into its watchful pose. The donkey drifted in and out of exhausted sleep, each awakening bringing a fresh wave of grief as reality reasserted itself. But through it all, the presence of the other remained, constant, undemanding, yet somehow essential. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, promising another day that would have to be faced without her, the young donkey lifted his head. His gaze met that of the dog, who had maintained its quiet vigil through the night. Something had changed in those dark hours. Not a lessening of grief, but perhaps the first seedling of acceptance taking root in the fertile soil of shared sorrow. The farm awakened to the gentle percussion of rain, not the violent downpour of summer storms, but the soft, persistent patter of autumn showers that seemed to whisper secrets to the earth. The sky hung low and gray, as if nature herself had dressed in mourning clothes. Mist clung to the distant hills, transforming the familiar landscape into something ethereal and strange, much like grief transforms the familiar terrain of daily life into unrecognizable territory. The farm owner approached the pasture with slow, deliberate steps, his daughter and two workers following at a respectful distance. They carried tools, shovels, ropes, a tarp, their purpose unmistakable. The time had come. They paused at the fence line, taking in the tableau before them. The still form of the mother donkey, her son standing guard beside her, and, surprisingly, the stray dog still maintaining its vigilant position nearby. "Well, I'll be," the farmer murmured, noticing the unlikely pair. "Seems he's found himself a friend." His voice carried the gentle wonder of a man who had spent his life observing the natural world, but could still be surprised by it. His daughter touched his arm, her fingers light against the worn canvas of his jacket. "Should we wait longer?" Her voice held a poet's sensitivity, always attuned to the rhythms of life and death that pulsed through the farm with each season. The old man shook his head, raindrops falling from the brim of his hat like tears. "It's been 2 days. We can't leave her like this. It's not right." He sighed deeply, the sound almost lost beneath the gentle drumming of rain on the pasture grass. The living have to go on living. It was a philosophy born of necessity, the farmer's creed that had carried him through countless losses, both animal and human. They entered the pasture with the careful movements of those who understand animal grief. The damp earth yielded beneath their boots, leaving impressions that slowly filled with rainwater, temporary marks of their passage, just as all things in life leave temporary impressions before being washed away by time. The young donkey's head came up sharply at their approach, his ears pinned back in warning. The dog rose to its feet, uncertain whether to flee or stay, its loyalty to its newfound companion warring with its ingrained wariness of humans. "Easy now," the farmer said, his voice low and soothing as he approached. "We're here to help, not harm." He moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who has spent a lifetime speaking the wordless language of animals, reading their fears and intentions in the flick of an ear or the shift of weight from one foot to another. The young donkey shifted position, placing himself more firmly between the humans and his mother. A sound emerged from his throat, not his usual bray, but something raw, almost a sob. It carried all the confusion and protest of a being confronted with reality too painful to accept. The farmer stopped, respecting the boundary, understanding that grief demands its own space, its own time, a truth that applies across species. "I know, boy, I know." He extended his hand slowly, palm up, the universal gesture of peace. "But she can't stay here. You understand that somewhere deep down, don't you?" His words were as much for himself as for the donkey, a reminder of the natural order that governs all living things, no matter how painful its manifestations. For several long moments, no one moved. Rain continued to fall, dampening coats and clothes alike, creating a gentle soundtrack to this solemn moment. The farmer's daughter wrapped her arms around herself, not against the chill, but against the weight of witnessing such raw emotion. The workers stood with heads slightly bowed, their usual banter silenced by the gravity of the scene before them. Then, to everyone's surprise, the stray dog approached the farmer, its body language cautious but not fearful. It moved with the deliberate grace of an animal that has learned to navigate a world filled with threats. Each step calculated, each movement precise. It sniffed his outstretched hand, then turned to look back at the donkey, as if communicating something only the animals could understand. Perhaps that these humans meant no harm. Perhaps that it was time to let go. Whether it was exhaustion, hunger, or some deeper comprehension, the young donkey's posture gradually relaxed. His ears came forward, his head lowered slightly. Subtle signals of acquiescence that spoke volumes to those who knew how to read them. The farmer took this as permission and signaled to his workers with a simple nod. Gently now, with dignity. The instruction was unnecessary. These men had performed this sad duty many times before. but the farmer felt compelled to say it anyway, honoring the significance of this particular loss, this particular grief. They worked with quiet efficiency, wrapping the mother donkey's body in the tarp before carefully lifting her onto a small cart they had brought. The tarp was deep green, almost black when wet, a color that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, much as death absorbs the animation and spirit that once defined a living being. Throughout the process, the young donkey watched, occasionally stepping forward as if to intervene, then stopping, torn between protection and acceptance. The dog remained close by, its presence seemingly providing some comfort in this incomprehensible human ritual. The workers moved, with respectful precision, their hands steady despite the rain that made everything slippery and treacherous. They spoke little, communicating mostly through gestures and nods. A shorthand developed over years of working together. When they struggled with a particularly difficult movement, no one cursed or complained. They simply adjusted their approach and tried again, understanding the importance of maintaining dignity in this moment. When they were ready to move her, the farmer's daughter approached the young donkey, slipping a halter over his head with practiced ease. The leather was soft with age and use, molding to the contours of his face as if it belonged there. "Come with us," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the rain. "You should know where she goes." She believed, as her father did, that understanding brings acceptance, that witnessing completion brings closure, even for animals who cannot comprehend death in human terms. The small procession made its way across the rain-soaked fields to a distant corner of the farm, where ancient oak trees stood sentinel over generations of beloved farm animals laid to rest. These trees had witnessed countless such processions over the decades, their massive trunks and spreading branches offering shelter and dignity to these final journeys. Their leaves, now turning gold and russet with the advancing autumn, whispered overhead as if sharing secrets of life and death too profound for human understanding. The workers had already prepared the ground, digging deep despite the mud that made their task harder. The grave was a perfect rectangle, its edges as clean as the circumstances allowed, a small gesture of respect that mattered to the farmer, though he would have been hard-pressed to explain why. Water had pooled at the bottom, reflecting the gray sky above like a mirror to another world. The young donkey watched, trembling slightly, as his mother's body was lowered with care into the earth. His eyes never left her form, wrapped now in the dark tarp that obscured her familiar shape but couldn't erase the memory of her presence. The farmer removed his hat despite the rain and spoke a few words, a simple farmer's prayer for a faithful animal who had served well. It wasn't eloquent or poetic, just honest gratitude for a life that had touched theirs, had contributed to the rhythm and sustenance of the farm. His daughter placed a handful of wildflowers, gathered from the greenhouse, atop the tarp before the first shovelful of soil fell. The flowers, late blooming asters and goldenrod, provided a splash of color against the dark tarp, a final tribute to a life well lived. The sound of earth hitting the tarp was jarring in its finality, a percussion that marked the true beginning of absence. Throughout it all, the stray dog sat nearby, its eyes never leaving the young donkey, as if measuring his grief, standing witness to this final farewell. Its fur was plastered to its thin frame by the rain, revealing the outline of ribs and hip bones, evidence of its hard life on the margins. Yet there was a dignity in its bearing, a steadfastness that belied its ragged appearance. When the last of the earth had been tamped down, the human stepped back, allowing the donkey to approach. He moved forward hesitantly, each step seeming to require conscious effort. He sniffed the freshly turned soil, pawing at it once, twice, before lifting his head to release a sound so full of sorrow it brought tears to the farmer's daughter's eyes. It echoed among the oak trees, a primal expression of loss that needed no translation. The humans departed quietly, leaving him to his grief, all except the farmer's daughter, who lingered at the edge of the small grove. Rain dripped from the ends of her hair, running down her face to mingle with tears she made no effort to hide. "I'll bring him some food later," she told her father, who had paused to wait for her. "He hasn't eaten since—" She let the sentence trail off, unable to complete it. The old man nodded, understanding both what was said and what remained unspoken. "Leave the dog something too," he said, surprising her with this acknowledgement of the stray's place in the unfolding story. "Seems to me that animal's earned a place here, if it wants one." He had spent enough years observing the natural world to recognize when unusual alliances formed, and to respect their purpose, even if he didn't fully understand it. As the rain gradually eased, giving way to weak sunlight, breaking through the clouds like hope piercing through despair, the young donkey remained by the grave, his head lowered. The freshly turned earth was already settling, rain smoothing its contours, nature beginning the long process of reintegration. The dog maintained its distance, but didn't leave, its loyalty to this newfound companion apparently stronger than its fear of humans or its need to wander. Hours passed this way, the sun completing its arc across the sky, shadows lengthening across the burial ground. The oak leaves rustled overhead, occasionally releasing showers of droplets when stirred by the breeze. Birds gradually returned to the trees, their song subdued as if in respect for the grief below. A rabbit ventured from the underbrush, paused at the sight of the donkey and dog, then continued on its way. Life asserting itself in the presence of death, as it always has, as it always must. It was nearly dusk when the young donkey finally turned away from the grave. His movements were stiff, his head heavy with exhaustion and hunger. The day's emotions had drained him more thoroughly than any physical exertion could have. He looked around, seemingly lost in the gathering darkness, uncertain where to go in a world suddenly devoid of the one constant he had always known. The familiar landscape of the farm, viewed now through the lens of loss, appeared alien and intimidating. The dog rose, shaking rainwater from its thin coat in a spray that caught the last light of day, transforming ordinary droplets into momentary jewels. With deliberate steps, it moved toward the path leading back to the main pasture, then stopped, looking back at the donkey. It took a few more steps, then paused again, its intent clear even to human eyes. "Follow me." There was no demand in the gesture, no impatience, just an offer, extended without expectation. After a moment's hesitation, the young donkey did just that. One hoof in front of the other, he began the journey back to the world of the living. Each step seemed to require conscious decision, as if his body had forgotten how to move forward without his mother's guidance. The dog matched its pace to his, neither rushing ahead nor falling behind, but walking beside him as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Pinpricks of light in the vast darkness, reminders that even in the deepest night, not all light is extinguished. At the pasture gate, the farmer's daughter waited with fresh hay, water, and, set slightly apart, a bowl of food for the dog. She had changed into dry clothes, but her hair was still damp, falling in waves around her face. She said nothing as the unlikely pair approached, simply opening the gate and stepping aside, understanding that words were superfluous in this moment. Some languages run deeper than speech, and grief is one of them. The young donkey entered his familiar pasture, now transformed by absence into something foreign. The same fence line, the same trees, the same shelter in the corner, all physically unchanged, yet fundamentally altered by the absence of his mother's presence. He approached the hay slowly, hunger finally overcoming grief enough to allow him to take a few mouthfuls. There was no enjoyment in the act, just the mechanical fulfillment of bodily need. The dog hesitated at the threshold, caught between its wild instincts and the pull of companionship, and offered food. It stood with one paw lifted, the very picture of indecision. Its eyes darted from the donkey to the girl to the open fields beyond, weighing options, calculating risks. "It's all right," the girl said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're welcome here too." She made no move toward the animal, understanding that trust must be earned, not demanded. She simply stood, offering acceptance through her stillness. As if understanding her words, the dog slipped through the gate and made its way to the waiting bowl. It ate quickly but neatly, the ingrained habits of a creature accustomed to having its meals interrupted or stolen. The girl closed the gate quietly and retreated to the fence line, watching as the two animals ate their separate meals, yet somehow seemed connected by the shared experience of the past days. The evening deepened around them, the last light fading from the western sky. Bats began to flit overhead, their erratic flight patterns tracing invisible patterns against the darkening blue. From the nearby forest came the first tentative hoots of an owl, announcing the transition from day to night. The farm buildings stood as dark silhouettes against the horizon, windows gradually lighting up as the human inhabitants settled in for the evening. Later, she would tell her father what she witnessed next. How the young donkey, having eaten enough to sustain him, but not enough to suggest any pleasure in the act, made his way to the sheltered corner of the pasture where he and his mother had always slept. How he stood there, lost before finally lying down alone. His body curled tightly as if trying to make itself smaller in a world suddenly too large and empty. And how the stray dog, after finishing its meal, approached with cautious respect before settling nearby. Not touching, but close enough that its presence could be felt in the darkness. Not an intrusion, but an offering. The simple gift of not being alone. "I think," she said thoughtfully as they sat at the kitchen table that evening, steam rising from mugs of tea that warmed their hands, "that they might save each other." The lamplight cast a warm glow over her face, softening the worry lines that had appeared in recent days. Her father nodded, understanding more than she realized. "Grief finds its own paths," he replied, his eyes drifting to the photograph of his late wife that hung on the wall, her smile frozen in time, preserved behind glass like a precious artifact. "And sometimes, healing comes from the most unexpected places." He spoke from experience, from the hard-won wisdom of his own journey through loss. They sat in companionable silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts, connected by shared understanding. Through the open window came the night sounds of the farm, the distant lowing of cattle settling for the night, the occasional bark of the shepherd's dog, the rustling of wind through the orchard trees. Life continuing its eternal cycle, indifferent to individual sorrows, yet somehow offering comfort through its very persistence. Outside, under a sky now clear and star-filled, the young donkey and the stray dog slept, not together, but near enough that neither was alone in the vast darkness. The donkey's breathing had finally slowed to the rhythm of sleep, his exhaustion temporarily overwhelming his grief. The dog lay with its head on its paws, one ear perpetually alert even in rest. The habit of a creature that has learned to survive by vigilance. It wasn't friendship yet, perhaps not even trust, but it was a beginning. And in a world recently shattered by loss, beginnings were precious things indeed. Like seeds planted in the disturbed earth of a fresh grave, they held within them the promise of renewal. Not replacement, never that, but the possibility of new growth alongside the memory of what had been lost. The moon rose, casting silver light across the pasture, illuminating the two figures, one large, one small, sharing the night's vigil. Different species, different histories, different paths that had somehow converged in this moment of mutual need. Their unlikely alliance stood as testament to life's persistent creativity in the face of loss, finding new connections where old ones had been severed, weaving new patterns from broken threads. And somewhere beneath the ancient oak trees, in freshly turned earth now settled by rain, the mother donkey's body began its return to the elements that had formed it. The final act of giving that completes life's circle, nourishing the soil that would feed the grass that would, in turn, sustain her son and countless others in seasons to come. Not gone, but transformed. Not ended, but changed. As the night deepened toward midnight, a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the sky, here and gone in an instant, but magnificent in its brief passage. No one was awake to see it except the stray dog, who lifted its head momentarily before settling back into its watchful rest. Some might have called it an omen or a blessing. The dog simply accepted it as another mystery in a world full of them, like grief and companionship and the strange, unexpected turns that life takes when we least expect them. The days that followed unfolded in a strange rhythm, like music played in an unfamiliar time signature, recognizable as life, but altered in fundamental ways. The young donkey moved through his routines mechanically, grazing without enthusiasm, responding to the farm workers' calls with reluctant obedience. His eyes frequently drifted to the path leading to the oak grove, as if expecting his mother to appear at any moment. The hollow absence that had taken residence in his chest seemed to expand with each passing day, a physical sensation that manifested in his slower gait, his lowered head, the diminished alertness of his normally expressive ears. The stray dog remained, to everyone's surprise. It maintained a careful distance from the humans, retreating whenever they approached too closely. But it showed no inclination to leave the farm. Each morning found it in the pasture with the donkey, and each evening it settled nearby as darkness fell. The farmer's daughter had taken to leaving food for it at regular intervals, placing the bowl just far enough from the fence that the dog could eat without feeling trapped. She noticed that the dog's coat was beginning to improve, the patchy fur filling in, a subtle glossiness replacing the dull, matted appearance it had worn like a badge of its difficult life. "Never seen anything like it," the farmer remarked one morning, watching from the kitchen window as the odd pair moved across the pasture. Steam rose from his coffee mug, fogging the glass briefly before dissipating. "That dog's appointed itself guardian or something." There was a note of grudging respect in his voice, the acknowledgement of one caretaker recognizing another. His daughter smiled, her hands busy kneading dough for the day's bread. The rhythmic push and fold of the dough was soothing, connecting her to generations of women who had performed this same task in this same kitchen. "I've been calling him Shadow," she said. "Seems fitting the way he follows." The name had come to her one evening as she watched the dog trail the donkey across the pasture, their silhouettes elongated by the setting sun, inseparable. "Don't get too attached," her father warned, though his tone lacked conviction. His weathered fingers tapped against the mug, a nervous habit he'd developed in the years since his wife's passing. Strays rarely stay put once winter sets in. They follow food and shelter where they can find it. He spoke from experience, having seen many such animals pass through the farm over the decades, appearing and disappearing with the changing seasons. But as autumn deepened, bringing crisp mornings and golden afternoons that set the maple trees ablaze with color, Shadow showed no signs of leaving. If anything, he grew more comfortable in his self-appointed role. The farm workers reported seeing him guiding the donkey away from a section of fence that needed repair, his body positioned to block the path, his posture insistent but not threatening. The shepherd swore he'd chased off a coyote that had been eyeing the chickens. Shadow's normally cautious demeanor transformed into fierce protectiveness, his bark echoing across the farmyard like a warning bell. That dog's got more sense than half the hired help, the shepherd told the farmer's daughter as she collected eggs one morning. His gnarled hands gestured toward Shadow, who sat at a distance, watching them with alert interest. Knows his business, that one. Born to guard something, I'd wager. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the young donkey began to respond to the dog's presence. It started with small acknowledgments. An ear flicked in Shadow's direction when he approached, a slight lowering of the head that wasn't quite a greeting, but wasn't rejection either. These minute changes might have gone unnoticed by someone less observant than the farmer's daughter, who had developed a keen eye for animal behavior through years of careful attention. Then came moments of what could only be described as interaction. The donkey pausing in his grazing to watch Shadow chase a rabbit across the pasture, his eyes following the dog's agile movements with what might have been interest. Or shifting position to allow the dog to lie in the patch of sunlight that broke through the clouds on an otherwise gray day. A small courtesy that spoke of growing awareness. One particularly memorable afternoon, the farmer's daughter witnessed the donkey deliberately drop a mouthful of clover within Shadow's reach. Not by accident, but with clear intent, his movements deliberate and focused. Shadow had approached the offering cautiously, sniffing it before looking up at the donkey as if asking permission. The donkey had simply continued grazing, but there was a new relaxation in his posture, a subtle shift that suggested the beginnings of comfort and companionship. The farmer's daughter observed these developments with quiet satisfaction, recording them in the journal she had kept since childhood. The leather-bound book was filled with years of observations, births and deaths, seasonal changes, the small dramas that made up farm life. Connection, she wrote one evening, her handwriting flowing across the page by lamplight. Not replacement, but something new, something necessary. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, that healing doesn't mean forgetting, that new bonds don't diminish the importance of those that came before. October brought the harvest, and with it, a bustle of activity that temporarily pushed grief to the margins of farm life. The fields turned golden, ready for reaping. The orchard trees bent low with the weight of ripened fruit. The garden yielded its final bounty before the first frost. Every hand was needed, every hour of daylight utilized in the ancient rhythm of gathering and storing that would see them through the winter months. The young donkey found himself pressed into service, carrying baskets of apples from the orchard to the barn, where they would be sorted and stored. The familiar work seemed to revive something in him. Not happiness exactly, but purpose. His steps grew more certain, his head a little higher. There was comfort in the routine, in being part of something larger than his individual sorrow. The workers noticed the change, commenting on his increased willingness, the return of some spark that had been missing since his mother's death. Shadow adapted to this new phase with surprising ease, trotting alongside the donkey on his journeys between orchard and barn, occasionally herding stray apples that rolled from overfilled baskets with a precision that suggested previous training. He seemed to understand the importance of the work, the necessity of the harvest, his natural intelligence allowing him to find his place in the complex choreography of farm tasks. The farm workers, initially wary of the stray, began to accept his presence, some even slipping him treats when they thought no one was looking. A crust of bread here, a bit of cheese there. Small offerings that acknowledged his contribution, his unexpected place in their community. Children who came to help with the apple picking delighted in his presence, calling to him, though he rarely approached them directly, maintaining the cautious distance of an animal that has known human cruelty as well as kindness. That dog's earned his keep, the farmer admitted grudgingly after Shadow alerted them to a fox in the henhouse, his urgent barking rousing the household before any chickens were lost. The farmer had rushed out in his nightclothes, shotgun in hand, to find Shadow standing guard at the henhouse door, the fox having fled at the commotion. Suppose we should make it official. The words were casual, but they represented a significant shift. The acknowledgement of Shadow's transition from tolerated visitor to valued member of the farm. His daughter hid her smile, knowing this was as close as her father would come to admitting attachment. She had seen the same process many times before. His initial resistance to any new presence on the farm, followed by grudging acceptance, and finally, though he would never admit it, genuine affection. It was his way of protecting himself from potential loss, a habit formed from years of farming, where attachment always eventually led to farewell. The next day, a proper dog dish appeared beside the water trough, its blue enamel surface gleaming in the morning light. Shadow's evening meal was served alongside the regular farm chores rather than as an afterthought, and the farmer himself could occasionally be seen reaching down to pat the dog's head when he thought no one was watching. Brief contacts that Shadow initially tolerated with tense stillness before gradually leaning into them, his tail offering a tentative wag. As the harvest concluded and the first frost silvered the pasture grass, transforming each blade into a miniature work of crystalline art. A new visitor arrived at the farm, a horse trader from the next county, leading a young female donkey. His wagon creaked up the drive in crisp morning, the trader himself a familiar figure in these parts, known for his fair dealings and knowledge of livestock. "Heard you lost your Jenny," he said to the farmer, his breath visible in the cold air as they stood in the farmyard. The female donkey beside him stamped impatiently, her breath creating similar clouds. "Thought this one might fit in here. She's gentle, good with other animals. Been raised with goats and a pony, so she's sociable." He patted her neck affectionately, and she leaned into his touch with easy familiarity. The farmer studied the newcomer thoughtfully, his experienced eye noting her good conformation, clear eyes, and healthy coat. She was smaller than their lost donkey, with a lighter coat and bright, curious eyes that took in everything around her. Her ears swiveled independently, tracking sounds from different directions, the mark of an alert, intelligent animal. "What do you think?" he asked his daughter, who had come to stand beside him, drawn by the sound of an unfamiliar voice. She had wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill, her cheeks pink from the cold and perhaps from excitement at this unexpected development. She watched as the young female was led into the pasture where their donkey grazed alone, Shadow lying nearby under a tree, whose branches were now mostly bare, its leaves a golden carpet on the ground below. The scene had a poignant beauty. The frost-covered grass, the bare trees, the solitary animals about to be introduced to a new possibility. "I think," she said carefully, choosing her words with the precision that characterized all her interactions with her father, "that grief needs time, but life needs company." She had learned this truth through her own experience. through watching her father navigate his solitude after her mother's death, through observing countless animals on the farm form and reform social bonds after loss. Isolation might be a natural phase of grief, but it wasn't a natural state for social creatures. The introduction was approached with caution. The trader and farmer both experienced enough to know that forcing interactions between animals rarely ended well. The young male raised his head sharply at the intrusion into his space, nostrils flaring as he caught the unfamiliar scent. His ears pricked forward, then flattened slightly, not in aggression, but in uncertainty. Shadow rose to his feet, alert but not alarmed, watching the interaction with focused attention, his body tense but not threatening. The female donkey, perhaps sensing the complex dynamics at play, displayed remarkable patience. She made no direct approach, simply lowering her head to graze at a respectful distance, her body language conveying neither threat nor demand. Her casual demeanor seemed to say, "I'm just here, doing my own thing. No pressure." It was a strategy that often worked better with animals than direct confrontation or forced familiarity. The male watched her warily for several long minutes before returning to his own grazing. Though his attention remained divided, one ear consistently turned in her direction. Occasionally, he would raise his head to locate her visually, as if reassuring himself of her position and activity. Shadow, after his initial assessment, settled back down under the tree, though his relaxed posture belied the alertness of his gaze as it moved between the two donkeys. "We'll give it time," the farmer decided, reaching an agreement with the trader to leave the female for a trial period of 2 weeks. No sense forcing what might come naturally. He had seen too many hasty introductions fail, creating more problems than they solved. Animals, like people, needed space to adjust to new circumstances, new relationships. The trader nodded in agreement. "She's a good one," he said, patting the female's flank before handing her lead rope to the farmer. "Patient, not easily spooked. Thinks she'll do well here." With a tip of his hat and a promise to return in a fortnight, he climbed back into his wagon and set off down the drive, the sound of hooves and wheels gradually fading into the morning stillness. Over the following days, a cautious choreography unfolded in the pasture, observed with keen interest by the farmer's daughter from various vantage points. The kitchen window, the barn loft, the fence line. The female donkey, named Willow by the farmer's daughter for her slender legs and graceful movements, gradually decreased the distance between herself and the male. Each day found her grazing a little closer, resting a little nearer, her presence becoming a constant in his peripheral vision. He, in turn, showed increasing curiosity about this new presence, occasionally approaching to sniff her before retreating to his familiar territory. These investigations became more frequent and lasted longer, his initial wariness slowly giving way to interest. One afternoon, the farmer's daughter observed them drinking from the water trough simultaneously, their reflections rippling side by side in the water's surface. A small moment of shared activity that represented significant progress. Shadow observed this developing relationship with what almost seemed like approval, dividing his attention between his original companion and the newcomer. He would lie equidistant between them when they grazed separately, or trot alongside when, increasingly, they moved across the pasture together. Sometimes he would approach Willow directly, sniffing her legs or feet, his tail wagging slightly in what appeared to be friendly greeting. She accepted these overtures with equanimity, occasionally lowering her head to his level in a gesture that seemed almost like acknowledgement. "It's as if he's facilitating," the farmer's daughter told her father one evening as they sat by the fire, the early darkness of November having driven them indoors earlier than usual. "Shadow, I mean," like he's helping them get comfortable with each other. She was darning socks, her needle flashing in the firelight, creating new fabric where holes had formed, a metaphor for the healing she was witnessing in the pasture. Her father nodded, pipe smoke wreathing his head as he considered her words. "Dogs are good at reading intentions," he said after a thoughtful pause. "Better than people sometimes. Maybe he sees something in both of them that needs the other." It was a surprisingly poetic observation from a man usually given to practical statements, and his daughter glanced at him with new appreciation. November arrived with biting winds and the first dusting of snow, transforming the landscape overnight. The pasture, so recently green and then golden, now lay under a thin white blanket that crunched underfoot. The three animals, donkeys and dog, began to spend more time in the shelter of the barn, their breath creating clouds of vapor in the cold air as they huddled together for warmth. Physical proximity bred familiarity, and familiarity slowly blossomed into something that, if not friendship, was at least companionship. The farmer's daughter noticed that they had established a consistent sleeping arrangement. The male donkey on one side, Willow on the other, with Shadow often curled between them, a living connection bridging the space. During particularly cold nights, she would find them pressed closer together, sharing body heat, necessity overcoming any remaining hesitation about physical contact. The trader returned as promised, evaluating the situation with experienced eyes. "They're settling well," he observed, watching the three animals move across the snowy pasture together, their tracks creating a winding path across the pristine surface. "Think you've got yourself a match here." The deal was concluded with a handshake and an exchange of money, Willow officially becoming part of the farm family. The farmer's daughter captured the moment in her journal when she first heard the male donkey bray again. Not the mournful sound of grief, but something closer to his old voice. It happened on a clear December morning, the air so cold it hurt to breathe, the snow reflecting sunlight with blinding brilliance. He had been watching Willow investigate a pile of fresh hay, Shadow circling excitedly around both of them, when the sound erupted from him as if surprised by its own existence. A rusty, tentative call that nevertheless carried across the winter landscape with startling clarity. Both Willow and Shadow had turned to look at him, seemingly as surprised as the watching human. Then Willow had responded with her own bray, higher and more musical, creating a duet of sorts. Shadow had added his bark to the chorus, the three voices mingling in the cold air like an impromptu celebration of connection. "Life," she wrote that evening in her journal, the lamp casting a warm glow over the page, "doesn't replace what we've lost. It builds around the empty spaces, creating new patterns that honor the absence while embracing what remains possible." She paused, pen hovering over the paper, searching for words to capture the complexity of what she had witnessed. Perhaps that's what healing really is. Not the absence of scars, but learning to carry them with grace while still reaching toward joy. As winter settled fully over the farm, blanketing the fields in snow and freezing the pond solid enough for skating, the three unlikely companions established their own rhythm within the larger symphony of farm life. They could be seen traversing the pasture together on clear days, the male donkey leading, Willow following closely behind, and Shadow ranging alongside or ahead, always returning to check on his charges like a conscientious shepherd. They developed their own routines, morning explorations of the pasture's perimeter, afternoon rest in whatever sunlight was available, evening gatherings in the sheltered corner of the barn where fresh hay was provided daily. The farm workers noted that the male donkey had begun to display protective behavior toward Willow, positioning himself between her and perceived threats, sharing the best grazing spots rather than claiming them for himself. "He's sweet on her," the oldest worker commented with a knowing smile. "Seen it before. They pair bond strong, donkeys do. Loyal creatures." His rheumy eyes, which had witnessed decades of farm life, recognized the patterns of attachment forming, different from what had existed before, but no less valid, no less important. Shadow, for his part, seemed to thrive in his role as companion to both donkeys. His coat had filled out completely now, revealing him to be a handsome dog of indeterminate breeding, perhaps collie mixed with something smaller and quicker. His eyes, once wary and constantly scanning for danger, now held a calmer light, though he maintained his vigilant nature, especially where his donkey friends were concerned. The farmer, watching them from the warmth of the kitchen one December afternoon, shook his head in wonder. "Nature finds a way," he mused, his breath fogging the window glass. "Always has, always will." There was a touch of awe in his voice, the humility of a man who, despite a lifetime working with animals, could still be surprised by their capacity for adaptation and connection. His daughter nodded, understanding that he was speaking not just of the animals, but of his own journey through loss. "It's never the same," she said, thinking of her mother. Gone now 5 years, the shape of her absence still palpable in certain rooms, at certain times. But different doesn't mean less. She had learned this truth through painful experience, that new joy doesn't diminish old love, that making room for new attachments doesn't require forgetting those that came before. Her father reached out, briefly squeezing her shoulder, a rare gesture of physical affection from a man more comfortable expressing himself through actions than words. "Your mother would have liked that," he said softly. "The way you put things. She had that same gift." It was perhaps the highest compliment he could offer, and his daughter treasured it, storing it away like the precious thing it was. Outside, snow began to fall again, large flakes drifting lazily from a pearl-gray sky. In the pasture, the donkeys raised their faces to the sensation, while Shadow pranced and snapped at the falling snow with puppyish delight, his paws creating temporary impressions in the accumulating whiteness. Their breath rose in plumes, mingling in the cold air before dissipating. Separate yet connected, individual yet part of the same moment. The farmer's daughter watched them through the window, her heart full with the simple beauty of the scene. There was something profound in witnessing this unlikely family they had become. Different species, different histories, different paths that had converged in mutual need and gradually transformed into genuine connection. It spoke to possibilities beyond the expected, to resilience that surprises even in the depths of loss, life continuing as it must, finding new paths through the landscape of grief, not erasing what came before, but building upon it, honoring it through the very act of moving forward, creating new stories that incorporate the old ones, weaving them together into a tapestry more complex and beautiful than either could be alone. As darkness fell early, as it does in December, the farmer's daughter lit the lamps and drew the curtains against the night. From the barn came the soft sounds of animals, settling, rustling hay, gentle movements, occasional quiet vocalizations, the sounds of companionship, of security, of belonging. The sounds of healing, imperfect but real, unfolding in its own time, in its own way. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the tracks the animals had made earlier, preparing a fresh canvas for tomorrow's journey. Nature's way of saying that each day offers a new beginning, a chance to forge new paths while carrying the memory of those that came before. A gentle reminder that even in the depths of winter, life persists, changed, perhaps, but no less precious for the transformation.